Hello, everybody. So, general pros and cons about having a stoma compared to having an inflamed colon and all of the problems I dealt with during those times. I was kind of surprised because I've never really made a list like this, and it's been probably about a year and a half or so. It'll be approaching 2 years, a little bit later this year that I had my first surgery. So overall, I mean, I'm still relatively new to it, but I mean, I've had it long enough to kind of develop a routine and experience most of the normal things you'll experience just through normal daily life. To be able to kind of talk about it and reflect on it a little bit. And I was kind of surprised that making a list like this are actually a lot more cons than I was expecting to come up with. However, when I actually kind of break each one down a little bit more, you'll see that, at least in my opinion, the cons are more like kind of small, nitpicky things, whereas the pros are just very big things that really change your life for the better. Whereas, the cons are more just things kind of like on a daily basis, just little things that are just slightly more inconvenience, I guess. But overall, there's no doubt it's a positive experience for sure. So to start, I'll just kind of go down the list of some of the cons that I came up with first. And again, when I read these apply to me. For some people, there might be other cons that don't really apply to my life, my lifestyle, and likewise, some of these that I have might be irrelevant to other people or much smaller than they are to mine. So the first one that I came up with is just there are some movement restrictions, just as far as like flexibility and mobility. I'm a really active person. Before I got sick at all, like I still played competitive sports, like I mean just casually, but like in leagues and stuff with my friends. And I pretty much haven't really. It's not so much that Crohn's or even having a bag have stopped me from playing, but I would say it kind of coincided with when you start to feel old as well. And the bottom line is it just wasn't fun anymore. So I don't play anymore, but if that was something I wanted to, I'm sure I could still, actually do more events and like actual sports than I could. But just certain movements, especially like a lot of bending and twisting. Um, Again, not so much that you can't, but just they're a little bit harder, or you have to be a little bit more conscious that that you have the bag there. Um, and it kind of feels weird, but over time you kind of learn to deal with it too. Like for example, when I probably the hardest movements that I do on a regular basis are anything having to do with like putting on shoes or socks, in particular on the right side, because that's where my bag is. So it's just it's like there's an object there. So when you go to bend down, it's just you can't quite bend as freely as you can. Like when I pick things up, I tend to kind of like put my right leg back a little bit, so I have more room to kind of lean forward. Um, but yeah, putting on shoes, socks, or every once in a while when you have to like clip your toenails or things like that, it's just a little bit harder. And early on, I was paranoid because anytime I bend, it feels like the adhesive is gonna wear off, or it's gonna, you kind of flex it, and when you bend, like your stomach and the skin kind of folds up. It just feels like it's gonna come loose. But over time, you realize that's not really true. So in my case, I actually had more flexibility and mobility than I realized, but it didn't really feel good until I kind of got used to what that felt like. And um, again, it doesn't really stop me from doing most things. It just makes them a little bit harder. Like another one that's kind of difficult for me are some weightlifting moves. Like a deadlift is not very comfortable to do, like just with the straight bar. Um, I can do it, but if I go up for like heavier reps, I feel like it's hard to find a comfortable position and focus on your form. And I guess those are the two things. So I can still do it, but I just don't go very heavy with that lift anymore because it just doesn't feel good. And there are other things that you can still do, but I just don't like the way it feels. It's kind of hard to explain. But that's that one. And obviously some of these things too, the more it fills up, it becomes harder as well because you certainly don't want it to, for it to kind of if you bend, it might kind of fold or limit its its overall volume or capacity, and you certainly don't want it leaking or bursting. Generally, what would happen is like the bag itself wouldn't burst, but it's like if there's buildup of air or output in there, and it gets squished together, most likely what would happen is like the seal would actually just blow out. Is where usually where if I've ever had anything like that happen, it's I've never actually had a bag like actually explode or blow up or anything. So that's something that I was kind of paranoid of, but that's very unlikely. It's more likely to happen at the seal, but it's either way, it's still not good. And yeah, the next one is just you have to deal with leaks sometimes. I've never lived anywhere where it's extremely humid. I'm experiencing a lot hotter weather than I ever did before I moved currently, but it's not really humid weather. But I've heard if you live in a more humid climate, leaks can be worse because just the adhesive wears off a lot faster, and you have to be careful. And I've noticed that's kind of true just with heat in general, because you just kind of tend to sweat a little bit more, and the adhesive doesn't last as long. But I've never had any major problems with that. But sometimes I'll just have leaks. In my case, it's probably just because I waited too long, and I should have changed my bag earlier, and I let it go a little bit, maybe a day or two too long. But usually, just again, coming with experience, you kind of know when you should or you shouldn't, and or when it's safe to kind of test it. Like if you're not going to really be doing anything all day, it's a little bit safer, because if you do have any kind of leak or problem, you're just at home and it's it's not as hard. But if you're going to be out somewhere, you're going to work or something like that, you probably should change it, because it's better to be safe than sorry. Another one is it's always, well, I shouldn't say always, but it's not uncommon for it to be making noises. Actually, mine's been going off just a little bit while I've been recording this. I doubt you can hear it, but it has a little bit, and sometimes it just kind of sounds like your stomach growling a little bit as well. So there have been times where I've just been out in public or I've been somewhere and it'll kind of make noise, and usually nobody really notices that much. Or again, if that is the case, they know that I have stoma, and they just kind of smile, because you can't help it. It just makes noises. But yeah, it's usually kind of like sometimes like a gurgling sound, or like I said, a rumbling stomach, or at worst it might actually just sound like farts sometimes. But that all varies. But it's just one of those things. It seems like it's only going to happen when you are someplace and it's quiet, or you're having a conversation, and it's when you're just sitting at home by yourself for hours, it's completely silent, doesn't act up. The moment you go out or you're around other people, it starts making all these fart noises. That's just one of those things that it happens a lot. So you can't really explain it, but it happens, and it's just something you have to deal with. But again, it's not really that big of a deal. Another thing that it's kind of hard to hide sometimes. What I mean by that is like under your clothing, obviously as it fills up, it's going to be more visible, and it's usually right on a spot where sometimes it's hard to tuck into your pants, because then it'll kind of close off and be up towards the top. There it goes, making a little bit of noise. I don't know if you can hear that, but it'll be up kind of towards the top, and then it just looks like you have something tucked into your pocket, or kind of at your waistline. Or the other one, it's kind of funny because I joke, like sometimes when I'm at the gym, if I'm not able to work out earlier enough in the day, where like I haven't really eaten as much, and therefore I'm not going to have as much output, and it's usually pretty active when you're active, is and I'm wearing like loose clothing, you can kind of ease it into like under your waistline. But then if it gets full enough and you don't have a chance, or you just don't want to be running to the bathroom all the time to empty it, at least for guys anyway, it's kind of funny, but you get this sort of like off-centered bulge, like not quite right in that area, but it's close enough that it's just kind of like, what is going on down there? It's again, that's kind of an extreme case, but I've had that happen a few times where I just don't feel like having to run to the bathroom, and it's until it gets to the point where you have to, I just let it go, and you just kind of get the weird slightly, like if somebody's looking at you like slightly off to your left, there's just kind of a bulge there where there almost should be, but a little bit off, and it's just kind of weird. But yeah, between those things, it's if it starts to fill, it just you can't really hide it. It's kind of strange. Which again, if you're around friends and family and they know you have it, it's no big deal. But if you're at work, you're doing something, it's just kind of an odd sight to see, I guess, or just I don't know. It's kind of strange. And then the last one that I came up with is it's very difficult to lay flat on your stomach, which sometimes comes into play for like exercise or stretching for me. Luckily, I don't really sleep on my stomach. I know for some people that's a huge problem. I usually lay on my back or on my sides, and it's like on the side, it's just enough out of the way that it doesn't really bother me. Like I am conscious of it, and I've had to like slightly change the way I sleep sometimes, but nothing major. So luckily for me, that one's not too bad. But overall, like I said, those are all kind of nitpicky things that when you weigh the benefits that are going to come with it, you'll take them. It's not really that big of a deal, and a lot of times, like with the ones making noise or the kind of lopsided bulge, those are ones that it's kind of you just have to laugh, sort of, because again, your friends know, and it's no big deal, like people that know you. But anyone else, if you're just in a weird situation like that, you're probably never going to see them again, and it's like, oh well, it just comes with the territory. You've probably had embarrassing stories of much stranger and possibly gross things, before having surgery and just dealing with Crohn's and inflammatory bowel disease in general. So it just, one way or another, it just kind of comes with the territory if you're going to have some interesting, possibly awkward and embarrassing stories. So on to the pros now, which, as I said, I feel like these are a lot more relevant. Um, Overall, I mean, just simply put, you feel better. I had one person as I was getting ready for surgery, and in my case, I was ready for it. I remember telling somebody, one of my clients, that I was looking forward to the surgery and all that, and they're just like, "You're the only person I know who's looking forward to surgery." And of course, but I didn't mean actually the procedure and the recovery and that sort of thing, but more of just having it done and feeling better. So it's like more specifically, I was looking forward to like maybe 6 months to 10 months to a year and on after surgery is what I was looking forward to, not the procedure itself. But somebody on the internet was telling me that even though I was able to still do a lot and be active, they were willing to bet. Like, I bet you're not going to realize how bad you actually feel right now until you have surgery and you've recovered and you feel so much better. It's just like, I mean, it's night and day. And I would say that's pretty true, because even though I still was pretty active, I was anemic. I did still deal with chronic fatigue, and those are probably the only like symptoms that I had on a regular basis that were difficult. I had most of like the going to the bathroom and stomach aches and cramps and pain and that kind of thing pretty well under control for the most part. I mean, I still experienced those things and would have some good and bad stretches, but definitely the chronic fatigue and just the anemia and low energy is probably what hit me the hardest. But usually I would just kind of push through that. But you have so much more energy, and you feel so much better, stronger, and just to kind of put a general term on it, you feel more alive. It's something that I would say that person on the internet, it's pretty true. For most people, um, if you're going to be having surgery or you think you feel pretty good, I'd be willing to bet that if you are anemic or you do deal with chronic fatigue but you're still pretty active, I'd be willing to make that same bet that after you've had surgery and you've recovered, a couple months to a year and later down the road, you feel so much better. And it's something you can't really explain. You just have to, well, you can't explain beyond that, but I mean, you'd have to really experience it to truly understand. Another one is you can go anywhere. And what I mean by go is, I mean actually go to the restroom. Obviously, you don't have the muscles to really control it. I mean, even the traditional way, you can't fully control it. I mean, if you've got to go, you're going to go, but you do have somewhat of a say of being able to hold it in, for lack of a better term. But with the stoma, you really don't. It just when it's going to go, it's going to go. You can usually feel it. It's very rare for me that I haven't felt it, and it's like I'll stand up or maybe wake up and well, when you sleep you don't feel it, but you'll just get up and it's like your bag's half full or like 3/4 full, and you're just like, wow, I didn't even feel that. Or maybe occasionally I'll feel that it's been a little bit active, but it feels like just a little bit's come out. But you stand, and there's actually a lot more than you realized. But for the most part, you really can't control it at all, beyond like, if you do feel like you have a blockage, or it's kind of hard to relate because it's been so long since, like in my case, and for most of us, like going to the restroom, I'm like a normal person. But if you do just kind of have that full heavy feeling like you probably have something needs to come out, sometimes like stretching or twisting, lying down, or just simply changing postures sometimes will get it moving. Heating pads, warm liquids, but beyond that, I mean, you can't really control it too much. And the other one that kind of goes along with that is, never ever have to sit on a toilet seat again, ever, if you don't want to, unless you want to for some reason. But I remember that was another thing that came up. While I mean, just overall that time when I was sick, and you obviously you'd have to use public restrooms sometimes, and rather questionable ones. It made me relate a lot more to, like when women are out and it's like, oh, I can't stop at at a gas station, or some place, because the restrooms are always nasty. And and until I would have to go and have to sit down a lot, it's kind of okay, well, I get this now, it makes sense. But yeah, we kind of joked. One of my friends back home, she she was saying that about like, yeah, I don't know about all the other things, if they're good or bad, but never having to sit on a toilet seat, that sounds pretty good to me. So that's definitely a positive. And I would say to even kind of build on that, in an absolute emergency, you can get a lot more creative than somebody that has to go, the more traditional way. You can kind of use your imagination there. I didn't have to do this at one time. I almost had, it was getting really full, and I needed to empty it somewhere. And there were no public restrooms in sight, and I didn't really know where one was. And I was in a big city, kind of downtown. I didn't know where to go. Luckily, I was able to find a fast food place that let me use it. But I was thinking, as a worst case scenario, I could go somewhere and get like some paper towels or napkins, just like a fast food place, just poke in, grab them if I had to. And probably very quickly, because when you empty it, as opposed to having to use the restroom in any other form, you don't actually have to remove any clothing or anything. And I was thinking, in a big city, nobody's looking at one person. If I absolutely had to, what I was going to do, again, I didn't have to. What I was going to do, though, I thought about it, and this always is a backup plan, now in the back of my mind if it ever comes up again. But usually for me, some of those, like just those public space waste baskets are just about waist high, and you could just dump it into one of those really quickly. And even as a worst case scenario, if you didn't have anything to wipe it up, you could even just close it up and not really make much of a mess, if any, if you absolutely had to. Which if you have all of your body parts and are able to go the traditional way, you wouldn't really have that option. Although this was in San Francisco, and I guess nowadays that's kind of what people do in some of those areas. So maybe that one's not as much of an advantage depending on where you live. But still, you can empty it a lot easier than it would be to actually have to, drop your pants and find a place to go and clean up. So overall, that's definitely a positive. Another thing that I liked, I don't know if, again, this just kind of depends on how comfortable you are with having an invisible illness. But for me, being able to stay active and still do a lot of people didn't know I was sick, or don't know the severity of it, or possibly don't even believe you, because you might not look sick at all, and beyond that, you might actually look a lot healthier than people that aren't sick in some cases. So for me, it was really one thing I always struggled with, was not having anything visible, to show for this illness. And I like the fact that it's actually something you can see, that people can see. If you wanted to show them, or had to explain it to show for your illness, they might not really understand it. Or if you just like flashed your bag, or mention, oh yeah, I have an ileostomy, and you just kind of show them, they might not even know what that is, but they would see it, and it's like, well, I don't have one of those, no one else I've ever seen has one of those. So it's like, it makes sense, you say you have some condition, and it kind of goes along with that. So it's weird. It hasn't really made me more or less confident about my body or having it, but just having something there to, again, to show for an invisible illness. I like that idea. I don't know if that really makes sense if I'm expressing that the way I feel, but I do like that. I mean, of course, like, yes, you'd rather not have something attached to you, but I mean, if it comes with feeling better, it's just part of having a disease. Again, part of your story, and depending on how people view it or not, it's different. It's unique. You might be the only person that somebody knows that has one. So it's just something else to think about. And finally, the last one for me, and this might not be the case for everybody, but I can eat freely again with very, very little restriction. I can pretty much eat whatever I want. And if you follow me on Instagram or you've watched any of my other eating videos, I don't need to tell you that I've taken full advantage of that, and I really enjoy that, to say the least. And if I understand correctly, if you have Crohn's, removing your colon, obviously you're still have the potential to have problems anywhere else along the digestive tract. My case was one of those odd ones that was really hard to tell which was which, and I had never. My official last diagnosis was Crohn's dominant colitis, which basically just means it's Crohn's, but all of the tests and symptoms and everything is going to look like colitis. I'd never had any trouble outside of my colon. So technically I still run that risk, but all of my doctors have told me without being able to guarantee, like, if you had it for, roughly 10 years and everything was in your colon, it's highly unlikely that you're just suddenly going to have problems somewhere else. So obviously, if you have Crohn's, you've had problems other places, you might still have some eating restrictions. If you have colitis and you never have had problems outside your colon, there's a much greater chance that you won't have any restrictions. Of course, we are at a higher, more susceptible to having a blockage. So I do have to be conscious and always careful of chewing extra, but as long as I do, I've never had any trouble with things passing through. And again, knowing how much to chew and which food's a little more dangerous, a little more safe, that all kind of comes with experience. But for the most part, as I said, I can eat whatever I want, and that's wonderful. So those are just my general pros and cons. I also have a part 2 to this video that's the pros and cons of waiting so long to have the surgery, because in my case it was almost a full decade from like when I was first diagnosed to after I'd have the surgery, and I was just kind of starting to be able to experience a little bit of somewhat of a normal life again. And it's a long time to wait. So I do have some thoughts on that as well that might be useful to people. There's probably other things that you might be concerned about, but as I said, kind of just the way it applies to my life, these were the biggest pros and cons for me. So if you've stumbled upon this video, hopefully you found it helpful. And as I always say, if you don't already know me from social media, you're always welcome to message me here or on Instagram. You can find me if you have any more specific questions or want to know about anything. I always like talking about it. It's fun to compare, share your story and hear about other people's stories, because even though we have such similar diseases, a lot of times our journeys are very different. So you're always welcome to do that. But don't forget to check out part 2 of the video and any of the eating videos, because again, I eat for me, but I record them for you, because I know a lot of people tell me that they like to see more than just before and after pictures. So if you're bored, you're stuck at home, your state's still not open yet, check out some of my videos and let me know what you think. Until next time, stay hungry and be healthy.